And Lauren?
Here.
All right. And Allison may be joining us later.
I'm here.
Allison's here.
Oh, okay.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Cormac's on the corner. Yes.
Oh, I got it. All right. Any members, any oral communications? See none? Okay. Approval of the minutes. Dawn sent some comments on the minutes, but Dawn, I think they're appropriately categorize them as points we want not to forget about, but not one item only one item may be required, a change in the minutes. And that was on item 4, where it stated that Commissioner Jackson wanted to review the RFP prior to its release. And you had said it did not need to be a gating item for the release. So I would suggest rephrasing that. Commissioner Jackson wanted to review the RFP, but not necessarily prior to its release. Don, does that satisfy you?
Sure, that's great.
All right. Any comments on that change to the minutes? Any other changes?
I
Yes,
had a question. I don't know if it's a change, but in item 5 on page 8, the second paragraph, it says, Abendschein reported the sale of surplus energy will generate about $2 million annually in earnings, and staff is exploring redirecting half of the earnings to reserve fund designated for local carbon reduction. And then it says the council delegated authority to the city manager to direct revenues from the sale of allowances allocated to the electric utility under the cap and trade program. And maybe we'll talk about it when we talk about the electric rates, but I don't recall talking about the cap and trade revenue from cap and trade. So I'd like to understand that better.
Yeah, I don't recall that comment in, was this just added after the meeting as further information, or was it stated during the meeting?
I thought Jonathan mentioned that, but just in passing as we were talking about it. We didn't get into a full detail about cap and trade, but okay. You know, we can talk a little bit more about that.
Okay.
In today's meeting.
All right. Lauren, do you want to propose any amendment to that, or you're okay just noting the point?
I'm okay noting it, and really I just like to understand what it is.
Okay, so. Very good.
All right.
And any other proposed changes to the minutes? Seeing none, then with the one amendment at Dawn's request, is there a motion to approve the amended minutes?
I'll move to approve the amended minutes.
Move, second.
Seconded.
All right, thank you. So we'll go all in favor, and we'll just do it in alphabetical order. Well, that might be me. I'm in favor. Don Jackson.
Favor.
AC Johnson.
I'm going to abstain because I wasn't at the meeting.
Okay. Greg Scharf.
Yes.
Lauren Siegel.
Yes.
And Lauren Smith.
Yes.
All right. The motion passes. The next item then is agenda review and revisions.
Michael, I've heard that people aren't able to join the meeting right now. Nelly, can you help us check if we're streaming?
People are not able to join, David?
Correct. That's what I'm hearing from some staff members.
Are we streaming on YouTube?
No, we are not streaming on YouTube. We are streaming live with the Media Center.
All right. While she's checking on that, let me ask, did anybody have any proposed revisions to the agenda? Are there any reports from commissioner meetings or events? None? Let's proceed to the General Manager of Utilities report.
Good morning, Commissioners, Chair Denneher. So my General Manager report is going to be a little different than in the past. I'm going to ask Jonathan Abendschein to also, we have a short presentation to talk a little bit about the financial future of where the utilities will be going. So I'm going to cover a little bit about, just to give everybody an update on what we've been doing from a utility standpoint. And then Jonathan's going to cover a little bit about what some of the snapshots that we've seen so far, and we will go from there. So my apologies. Right here in front of me. So just a little bit about the city workforce to give you a little bit of an idea around what's going on with this COVID crisis that we're in. So a little bit of just around the workforce priorities. City Manager Shikata shared this with the City Council on this past Monday. And I don't know if anybody had seen the broadcast or had seen this portion of it. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the bigger picture from the city's perspective, that and from what the departments are kind of doing at this period of time. So our IT department, they're staffing to supporting systems, remotely workers, as well as supporting on staff using their PPE and their social distancing protocols. I have to give a huge shout out to the IT department. I'm going to go into some numbers just from how many folks are actually working from home, and everything that going from this meeting here to the city council meetings. They've done a tremendous job. They've done hours and hours of putting these meetings together, and they've done a fantastic job to make sure that our staff alone, just getting our VPNs working so that we're allowing folks to be working from home at any given time, has been a huge task for them. So again, a huge shout out to the IT group. Library staff we have, as we talked about last time, supporting a community support call center and handling in-calls, emails, with additional communication supports preparing for recovery. So we actually have a offset call center for the community to be able to call in and ask questions, get answers, scripts that have been put in place. And so the library staff has been busy taking these calls. Planning and Development Services staff continues to handle the applications of any kind of permits online and submitting anybody that is having some permits, as well as they're assigned some EOC duties that go along with that. Public Works is still staffing primary effective essential work that's being done out in the streets. They are running about the same way as that the utilities is, where about half of the workers are working at any given week, and then the other half are at home doing other essential work that needs to be done. And I'll get into that a little bit more as we get into the utility side. Administrative services, revenue collection staff continues to process the payments and refunds when needed. Accounting staff is completing interim audits, and they're doing researching on setting up FEMA requirements and record keeping. And then also trying to deal with the budget as a whole. Our community service, which is our park staff, is supplementing some of the rangers in the recreation and creating virtual programs and preparing programs for recovery for the art and science staff. And then our fire inspectors that would typically go out and look at permitting that's going on is now actually, they're actually doing some wildland fire, cleaning up with some of the hillside areas, identifying some of the residents that might need some trimming back. So they're actually out in the field and reinforcing vegetation management on that standpoint. So the city allocation as a whole is about that 50% of the assigned are working from home with essential work that they've been doing. So about 45 are actually reporting on site. Mostly police and fire are all on site. And then there's about a 5% where folks have been on leave. Some type of administration, sick leave, vacation, so on and so on. And then if you were able to watch the city council meeting on this past Monday, Council passed paid ad leave for the COVID-19 emergency to address the workforce. And the pay was approved through June, the pay period of June 30th. So what that means is that employees that are at home that might not have any essential work, or that they're not having 100% of their work, was able to basically put down for admin pay. And the council approved that all the way through June 30th. So that will continue on that. Like I said, that was huge for the workforce. And then a little bit more broken into to the utility side. Our communication staff is still dedicated, and amount of work time is supporting the citywide communication efforts. They're writing and publishing daily community support for emails, newsletters, and writing the daily city council digest, as well as working with the external call center with working on their scripts. Customer service is continuing to answer community billing inquiries, which include financial assistance options available during this crisis, extending the payment arrangements from 3 months to 18 months. And then one of the things that we found was with our this phone system that we have, we are able to actually have half of our customer service folks working from home. So they're able to connect through their phones to their computers and actually able to take customer calls in. So it was something that we were thinking about doing before, but during this crisis, it actually worked out really well, again, with the help of IT, that we're able to keep most of our folks at home and still be able to answer the phones. The credit and collections group, which is the group that does mostly refunds and customer deposits, they're still managing the fiber optic utility back office portion of it. And then the other big thing is that around the meter readers. So what are we doing around meter reading? So about 1/3 of the meter reading routes, which is about 25,000 meters, are being estimated. And the reason why those meters are being estimated is that, as all of you know, is that some of the meters are located in the backyards. And so one of the things we did was we didn't want the meter readers to make contact with the customers. So what we're doing is we're estimating 25,000 meters. We don't have exactly that many meters in the backyards, but what's happening is the way the routes are set up, that some of the routes are actually in the front where they can actually read them, but they're in with those backyard easements. And so we can't break those routes apart. So unfortunately, those other meters are being estimated at this period of time. So we are getting a few calls around the estimation portion of it. We've sent letters out to those affected customers. And then we continue to send out letters to them, letting them know that they're still being read estimation, and that if they do receive a bill that seems not to be exactly what they thought that their average usage would be, is that we're making adjustments on the fly as those customers are calling. So there's a big effort on making sure that our bills are done properly. The RMD, which is our resource management group, and our UPS groups are still working with customer services on low income, small, medium business utility assistance programs. We're still looking at ways to come up with some type of assistance for the small and medium businesses. Big effort on that. To continue to monitor the electric, gas, and water loads. And we'll get into that a little bit more when Jonathan makes his presentation. Market pricing, the utility financial positions, and a big effort on running models on recession scenarios, planning for utility rates and finance projections as we move forward in the coming months. Engineering staff, again, most of the engineering staff are working from home. And again, through the VPM. So what they're end up doing is that they're still maintaining invoice payments. We still have payments that are coming in from some of the contractors. We have no contractors working in utilities as this period of time for around our CIP, capital improvement programs. They're still completing their red line as-built drawings. And then they continue looking at our cyber security for our SCADA systems. The big thing with that is that they are also continuing to look at doing design for future projects. a big push that we think will happen is that possibly as we move into this, if we do move into recession, is that the idea is that we want to be ready ahead of time, as all of you have talked about, as well as the council, about looking at ways that take advantages of the economy at scale. We think that probably contractors' pricings might go down. So what we get today for $10 million for about 5 miles worth of installation of plant, main services, meters, things like that. We're hoping that what we'll see is that economy of scale will go down, and that we'll actually be able to increase the mileage on these projects. So we are moving forward with our design phases to try to get out in front, so that when the first of the year comes around, that we'll be ready to go and shovels in the ground, and then we can move forward with taking some of those advantages on our side. So engineering is really pushing really hard on looking at new designs and moving forward with that. Operational staffs are still continue to respond to emergencies, electrical and water, gas, waste, or outages. They're cleaning sewer mains. They're maintaining the street light and traffic signals. And what, like I mentioned, is that since those are mostly our essential workers, so what we have done is that we've gone to a split rotation, that folks that would be off for a week and then on for a week. And so we're down to about a third of our crews with that. And the idea behind that is to try to keep as many folks at home. We're sending our folks out in single vehicles, as many as we can. And then as they have to get together as a crew, we're making sure the social distancing is more than the 6 feet. They are wearing face masks now at this period of time. And things seem to be pretty well overall from the department. Spirits are high. I think that the walls are getting a little close in some that have been home for such a long period of time as we move forward. But overall, the group is doing really well. Our numbers are a little bit different on our allocation numbers. So we have a total right now of about 215 employees that are in the utilities. And about 60% of them are actually working from home. Again, couldn't have done that without IT working really hard to get us our VPNs and being able to work from home. 35 are assigned to report on a weekly basis, and then about 5% are on different leaves. We have a few folks that are on military leave. We have a few folks that are on maternity leave, and we have a few other folks off at this period of time. So that's kind of the breakdown. A little different than the overall picture that I mentioned earlier from as a general. But like I said, our numbers are pretty close to that. Like I say, 60% of our folks are actually at home every day, day in and day out. So all the ADs check in with their folks on a daily basis, and their managers do. Talking about their work assignments, making sure that they're doing what they need to be doing. And then there's check-ins at the end of the day about what they were able to accomplish during that period of time. So I think that overall, again, like I said, the upbeat is the department's in pretty good shape at this period of time. So with that, if I can answer any questions first, hold on for just 1 second, sorry. You can tell me.
Thank you, Dean. Sounds like you're managing as well as can be done in these circumstances. Any questions from commissioners or Allison? Okay, let's move on.
Okay.
Hi, this is Nellie Bound from the city clerk's office.
Oh, so I don't mean to interrupt. So Tabitha just told me that we need to pause the meeting. Sorry about this. So we need to reopen, and I guess it's not allowing other folks to get in. So
Nellie, what do we have to do? Sorry.
So we need to, I believe you guys have already gone through oral communications. So we will need to reopen oral communications and announce that the password we had listed on the agendas was incorrect. But I have the correct password. 1 second. The correct password for the agenda is 293286. Again, that is 293286. So that
And
is the
what do we
password.
need? What do we need that for?
That is so that the public can join the meeting. At this point, the public has not been able to join into the meeting because the password they had listed on the agenda was incorrect. So with this updated password, they're still able to watch the meeting streaming on MidPen. So for those who are watching this meeting, again, the password is 293286. And we should give everyone a couple of minutes to see if we have any attendees who wish to join, any members of the public. And then if I believe you guys have already gone through oral communications, but I would suggest reopening oral communications and giving the opportunity for the public to speak if they need to.
Right, we'll do that after the utility director report. Let's have the minutes reflect that Lisa is also present. She joined after the roll call.
Okay. So, sorry. So Tabitha, do we need to get out of this meeting now?
No, we do not need to get out. We just need to give the public a couple of moments.
Oh, okay.
To see if they feel they want to join.
All right, great. So Michael, do you want me, should we just stop here real quick before Jonathan makes his presentation on the financials pieces?
Let's proceed.
Okay.
With Jonathan.
So, like I said, I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan Abenshine, our Assistant Director for Resource Management. And he is going to walk us through some slides where we've done some modeling and looking at what these impacts might be from an economical standpoint for the utilities. So with that, I will turn it over to Jonathan.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Jonathan Abenshine, Assistant Director for Utility Resource Management, and I'm going to talk to you just for a few minutes about some of our early estimates of some of the economic impacts we're seeing from shelter in place and the pandemic more broadly. I'll just say that at a high level, the impacts that we're seeing so far are looking modest and manageable for the Utilities Department. I think these economic downturns tend to affect the Utilities Department. The utilities a little bit differently from the general fund, which is heavily dependent on revenues like sales tax and other revenues that suffer that are pretty heavily impacted by shelter in place. But I will just note that there's a lot of uncertainty, and the impacts could look a lot more significant a few months from now. So I would just consider this to be a preliminary look at what we're seeing, and we will be coming back to you with more assessments as time goes on. Let's see here. Okay, so there are two. So I'm going to present two time periods that we're looking at. First is the impacts that we're expecting to see in FY 2020 based on the trends we're seeing so far. And those we feel a little more confident about than what the long-term impacts are going to be. And I'll talk about the long-term impacts on the next slide. So there are two key impacts that we're tracking during shelter in place. One is load decreases or decreases in sales. And then utility bill defaults. So people who have used energy or water and who end up being unable to pay their bills for economic reasons, both businesses and individuals. So we've been tracking our loads for 4 full weeks at this point. So let me start with load with sales. So we've been tracking our loads using data about how much energy we're actually bringing into the city. As this is in contrast to sales, which is actual metered usage at the customer's meter. That data comes in a lot slower because we don't have smart meters. So, and we only get that on a monthly basis. So we don't have a lot of data on sales yet. But as far as our loads go, we've been seeing some electric load decreases, but not a lot of decreases in gas or water yet. And we, without the sales data by customer sector, it's hard to know exactly what's going on. But I will note that our electric utility has a much greater share of its load from a far greater share of sales from the business community. And so that means that as businesses shutter or people begin to telecommute, it has a larger impact on our electric utility as compared to our gas or water utilities, where about 50% of our usage is actually residential. And so I think the decreases in sales are associated with our commercial businesses has been offset by increases in sales with larger numbers of residents working at home.
Jonathan, one question is: there's a shift away from the commercial to the residential. We can be pretty confident of that. How does the difference in rates between the commercial and residential impact projected revenue?
The rates are fairly similar.
Okay.
And so I'm not expecting major.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Okay, and one other thing that happens with our electric, gas, and water utilities is that for every dollar of energy every dollar of sales revenue that we lose, we're able to cut costs between 40 and 60 cents. About 40 to 60% of our costs are related to actual water or electricity or gas that we're buying in order to serve loads. And so when loads decrease, we don't have to buy that electricity, gas, or water. So taking that into account, if we continue to see 8 to 10% load losses for the electric utility for the next 3 months, that'll be about a $1.5 million net loss of revenue to the electric utility, which is a very actually manageable impact to the electric utility for FY 2020 and can be absorbed from existing reserves without too much of a problem. The other thing that we're looking at are the impact of defaults, and that's something that we don't really have a lot of data on yet. It's going to be a little while before we're able to start tracking how many delinquent accounts we have, and we have some limitations on how we track those on what data we can get about delinquent accounts from our billing system. So we're working with our credit and collections team to try and get some more current data about that. We looked back at the Great Reset. We looked at a couple of things just to try and set some boundaries on what those losses might look like. So we did two things. First, we looked back at the Great Recession, and during that entire period, defaults never reached 0.25% of revenue, which is in the ballpark of $100,000 to $200,000 for the gas and water utilities, and maybe in the ballpark of $400,000 to $600,000 for the electric utility. So the recession didn't have a significant impact on defaults, and I think part of that has to do with the fact that the city has, especially its electric utility, has a smaller share of its sales go to those people who are most impacted by the recession, small businesses and low-income residents. And so I think we suffer less from defaults than utilities in other communities. We also estimated what might be the upper bound that we could see from defaults in the retail and restaurant sectors. And I think we need to add hotels. We've been working to gather that information as well. What you're seeing here is really the technical upper bound of what we might see in defaults. If people were to continue operations at normal levels, which they're clearly not right now. Many retail and restaurant establishments are shuttered right now, and so they're not actually using a lot of electricity. But if they were to use electricity at a normal rate for the next 3 months and then default on 100% of those bills, 100% of customers defaulted on 100% of those bills, the impacts that are up on that slide are what you would see. We're not expecting we're going to see anything close to that, but we could see, we could see several $100,000 in defaults in the gas and water utilities, and maybe between $1 million and $1.5 million in the electric utility, if we're thinking conservatively. So I'll stop there and ask if people have any questions about these sort of preliminary FY 2020 estimates. And actually, before I stop, I'll just say that those numbers that I'm citing to you, those are also, losses that we can absorb with the existing reserves available to each utility right now if we needed to.
Any questions from commissioners?
Sorry, sorry, Jonathan, just one question. Your last statement, those losses, are you saying that the 3.8 million maximum possible loss over the 3 million could be absorbed based upon where we stand in with our existing reserves? Is that?
Yeah, so let's take the electric utility as an example. That 3 million technical maximum plus the 1.5 million net loss due to the decline in sales revenue. If we had to absorb $4.5 million from existing reserves this year, we could. Whether that would be a prudent thing to do, given the uncertainty of future economic impacts, that's a whole other question, and it probably would not be, but we could absorb that right now.
Thank you.
Jonathan, that 3.8 million, just to make sure I understand, that assumed that they were using their typical amount of usage and then defaulted. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. So it's a little double counting because that would be reflected in load loss if they're not using their full load.
That's right.
And
that's why we're considering these very conservative estimates here.
Okay. Right. And of course we have the savings here. Thank you. Any other questions?
Chair Donaher, if there aren't other questions from commissioners, may I ask one?
Please.
Thank you. Thank you, Assistant Director Abendschein. Hello. My question is, do you have any way of knowing as a utility if someone has shut their business, for example? Like, I'm not sure if we actually know collectively which retail and restaurants are open or closed unless, people are driving by or checking online. Is there any way that you're able to tell that?
I don't think so right now because, again, we don't have the smart meters. So
too bad.
I think it's more anecdotal right now, unfortunately.
Okay, thanks. Just looking for a data source as we think about our business roundtable that the city manager is starting to develop. Thank you.
We may be able to provide some information as the billing cycle continues and we see usage drop off in certain accounts, that we may be able to provide something later on.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Jonathan.
Okay.
Jonathan, you have anything else?
Yeah, I'll move on and I'll just talk briefly about future potential impacts. So like I said,
sorry. Jonathan, one additional question. If we can go back to the last slide. The model that you have run represents 3 months of loss. Is there a model that you are currently running that reflects a percentage of the businesses closing and shuttering permanently for the remainder of the year?
That's a great question, and I think it's a good lead into this next slide. Okay. So when we think about businesses shuttering for the long term or shuttering for the rest of the year, we're getting into our future financial planning scenarios, and we're looking at scenarios like the one you're describing, Commissioner Smith. Especially in our electric utility, where we have some real evidence right now that loads are decreasing, and if we were to continue to see 10% load drops through the next through FY 2021, that would be a pretty significant impact. So we're working on those models right now, but we don't have them ready to present to you tonight, unfortunately. I hope to have them for you in a couple weeks in the May meeting. But I did want to just give you a little bit of context by looking at our most recent major economic downturn and letting you know what happened with utilities back then. We took a look at sales at losses of revenue during the Great Recession. We had to separate out a few different other sales impacts that we saw during that time. We have some long-term downward trends in our electric, gas, and water sales for a variety of reasons that we could talk about during the financial plan discussions. We also have weather variation with some of the utilities, and we had a drought from 2008 to 2010 that where we had voluntary water use restrictions, so that factors in as well. But when we separate those things out, the load impact that we contribute to the Great Recession appears to be actually minimal, about a 1% to 3% load decrease at most. Utilities really did not see much decrease in load during that time. I've mentioned before that write-offs during the Great Recession didn't exceed 0.25% of revenue, and I will actually amend that statement. The water utility did see a 0.75% impact of revenue, which again is in the $200,000 to $400,000 one-time expense range. So if what we see in the next few years is similar to the Great Recession, this is something that I think we can manage. But of course, this recession is likely to be different, and so we're working on some alternate forecasts that might take into account the fact that recessions evolve slowly, and this was just a sudden stop to the economy. It may take a very long time to recover. And there may be just changes in the way that we work that affect loads as well going forward into the future. We're working with the city's administrative services department also to make sure that we're aligning our forecasts with the city's assumptions, so that we're all working from the same set of numbers. But they are very early in determining what their long-term forecasts are. So we're early in that process. So I'll just stop there. If there are any more questions, I'm happy to answer them, or I'll be finished.
Commissioners or Allison, any more questions?
I have a somewhat unrelated question, which is there's been a lot more rain this month than last month. I was just wondering, has that been good news for the snowpack, or we don't know yet?
Yeah, so that's something we're dealing with at the same time with the electric utilities. We're in a dry year, and that has an impact on our hydroelectric output. March did help, but we are still looking at a probably $3 to $5 million impact from dry hydroelectric conditions, in addition to the impacts of COVID. And so we've taken that into account in our models. So when I say that the COVID impacts are manageable, that's manageable in addition to the impacts from low dry hydroelectric conditions. So thank you for that question.
Dean and Jonathan talked about how our purchases of energy and water and gas go down as our load goes down. Are there any other cost savings that accrue to the utility department during this period?
I think that represents the largest cost saving that we see. I think there are some other types of cost savings, but I don't think they approach the level that supply cost savings. They don't approach any more than a fraction of that supply cost savings impacts.
All right, and of course, as we discussed before, if it is a lengthier recession, that's not a reason to cut CIP. It's a reason to accelerate CIP and take advantage of lower costs. All right, well, Dean, anything further from two of you?
No, I think that concludes my GM report.
All right, well, let's ask then if there are any oral communications from the public. Let's see.
I have no calls or emails from the public.
All right, we'll move on then. Any commissioner comments? None. Any unfinished business? We had none. And then new business, we'll go on to the first agenda item, which is about the electric rates that we've talked about before.
Okay, so I'd like to introduce Eric Hennessy. He's going to cover the first portion of this on the electric rates and financial plan. So Eric.
Good morning, commissioners. So today we're bringing to you the electric, gas, and wastewater financial plans. We're starting off with electric. So prefatory slide, next slide. I think just want to start off, we are proposing at this point in time a 2% electric rate increase for a variety of reasons. One, we would like to try and keep rates going up by at least inflation going forward for what we've seen. But two, again, because of everything we've been discussing, the ongoing uncertainty related to electric sales, to what future costs may be or revenue streams, we feel that it is prudent at this point in time to continue to have some level of increase going forward to the utilities. However, that said, we do also have a 0% rate increase scenario added here for you to consider. So with that, at this point in time, our operations reserves are all looking to be well within operational guidelines. In fact, we have enough funds from earlier surplus sales revenues that we've seen coming in earlier in the year. We were planning on starting to pay back a $10 million loan from the Special Projects Reserve taken back in 2018. We were also planning on adding some money to our CIP reserve as well as our hydro stabilization reserve. I'll say the hydro stabilization reserve at this point in time, we probably won't be adding that money back in, only because we'll likely be using that to cover the dry hydro conditions that we've been seeing in the latter part of the year. But all that's, we have quite a bit of money that we're already, we're planning on pushing off to other reserve funds. So if we do end up short in FY20, we have about like $5 million in. So we have quite a bit of fund that we can work with. Next slide. So in the electric utility, most of these I believe you've already seen before. They were in the preliminary presentation that we did a few months ago. But most of our electric costs, about 40% of our electric costs are distribution, but the majority, about 60%, are related to supply. And so yes, for everything that we don't sell, if sales decrease by 10%, we save 60% of that cost through not having to purchase. And sometimes in case we have additional contracts, we might be able to sell if there's anything out there available. Next slide. So our main supply cost drivers, again, historically have been transmission costs have been increasing dramatically. We don't really have any additional costs related to renewables. All those projects have come online. Our overhead costs have been increasing slowly, but we've been working with NCPA to provide some help in keeping those costs down. Next slide. On the distribution side, we have been seeing an increased cost for capital investment, and we are seeing that that's probably going to continue. We might even have more projects going forward as we evaluate our system and continue to work to make our system more bulletproof and robust. But we also have the addition, the regular ongoing medical and retirement overhead increasing by inflation. Here too, underground construction costs have increased substantially. We'll see what happens going forward. And while we're not necessarily having any additional contract crews out, getting line workers out to work on those projects has been an additional cost that we have seen historically. We're hoping that recovery will allow us to continue to work on larger projects going forward. Next slide. So here's our proposed rate increase path. So you can see for FY20, for FY19, I'll just preface this whole slide. Again, the bars that you see are expenses and costs related to the utility. The blue line up at the top is total revenue. And for the last few years, due to good hydro conditions, our revenues have been above our expenses. And this is allowing us to do things like pay back the special projects loan, to push money to CIP reserves, to hydro reserve if possible. But the revenue line itself is staying relatively flat. At this point in time, we were looking at increasing rates to keep roughly in pace with our inflationary increases that we've been seeing moving forward. So about 2 to 3% rate increases going forward. Next slide. Unless anyone has any questions on this particular. So again, and for the total rate increase, about half of it is related to CIP cost increases at this point in time. The dark blue, the net electric supply cost increase, that's actually a net figure. We had about a 1% supply cost increase, but then we also get new supply revenues that offset. So that's a merged piece of pie. We have a little bit going to operation costs, but again, we also have, at the time that we did this forecast, we had a certain amount of load loss factored in. I would also say that my forecasts were a little bit more on the pessimistic side. Plus, now with this recent downturn, it looks like we might be coming closer to what my original projections were saying anyway. So hopefully we're going to be in a good space on the electric side. Next. So here are, like as I said, our operating reserves for the supply are looking like they're going to stay within the guideline ranges, and we have some room to play should we need to. We have
Eric?
Yes.
Yeah, you've gone quiet there for a moment.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Do these projections assume the rate increase?
Yes, these projections assume the rate increases. We have an alternative, as I said, I'll present the alternative a few slides in.
And apologies, I also missed something, Commissioner Danaher. Eric, can you also restate what you said on slide 7 with respect to your earlier models? I believe you mentioned pessimistic load demand now becoming reality. Can you restate that so that we can hear? Sorry.
Yes, I had on my, I would say for my electric load for FY20, I had already lowered my expectations on, I had originally started off with lower expectations for sales for this year. Mm-hmm. Earlier in the year, they were turning out to be higher. So we were possibly going to be able to have even a more money coming in, but now with the last three to 4 months with things going more towards downturn, the sales are coming in closer to what I model. So
Eric, I'm going to suggest you, I'm going to suggest you turn off your video. I think there's a bandwidth constraint coming from you, and maybe we get better audio then.
Okay, my apologies. Let's see if that helps somewhat. So let's see. Should I go back and restate anything? Or?
If you don't mind, that'd be fantastic. I apologize, but that would be great.
Oh, no worries. So yes, my sales projections that I had.
My theory didn't work. You still cut out there.
Okay, my apologies. Let's see. Yes, okay. So my, as I said, the sales that I have in the model should roughly match what we are seeing for the end FY20 at this point in time. So I think we're in pretty good shape with regards to our both sales and reserve positions.
And how does your model perform today based upon what we know over the last month for your projection for fiscal year 2021?
Well, for FY 2021, we have, I had continued a slight sales decline, but depending on how we view, or depending on what happens with further shutdowns or whatnot, it does not, my models do not have continuing COVID response built into them. I will say that, so.
Noted, thank you.
So I think I probably can, as I said, on slide 8, the electric supply operating reserve projections are looking to be good, and we have room should we need it, should we have additional impacts. Next slide. The distribution reserve is also fairly healthy. It's a much smaller reserve, but we have a bit of play above the minimum guideline level and above the risk assessment guideline as well. Next slide. Our rates are about 34% below PG&E. So we're well below the local competition in that respect for our rates in general. Next slide. And here's a comparison of the current rates under a variety of bill conditions, both the current rates and proposed, as well as their corresponding current values with PG&E as well as Santa Clara. So whereas you can see we are below PG&E both currently and under any proposed rates, we are not as competitive when it comes to Santa Clara, but we're not too far off in that respect either. So. Any questions or next slide? I'm gonna probably skip past this. This is fairly wonky, but this gets into the, yeah, there we go. So the alternate rate increase scenario here, you can see this is our proposal or the alternate if we do a 0% rate increase in FY 2021. It would probably involve, yeah, about 4% rate increases going forward rather than 2s and 3s. But that is a possibility that we have going forward. So we thought it'd be prudent to present that alternative. Next slide. And I think that might actually encompass most of what I was.
All right.
It keeps all of our reserves within play, but then we have the next 2 slides show the reserve impacts under this particular scenario. But that pretty much ends my presentation other than the to present the recommendation slide on page number 17 or 16 rather. So our proposal and staff that we are requesting that you recommend that to increase rates effective July 1 for a 2% rate increase. The financial plan currently shows a 2% rate increase as well. We are planning on amending the utility reserve management practices to reflect changes, ongoing changes that we have for the CIP reserves and some cleanup. And approving the following transfers again, up to $5 million from the Supply Operations Reserve to the Special Projects Reserve, which depending on economic conditions, we may or may not do. Same for the up to $4 million from supply to the hydro stabilization, and up to $7 million from distribution to CIP. And that ends my electric presentation, and I welcome any questions you may have.
Commissioners, any questions? Martin?
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, please, I was calling on you.
So I do have a couple of questions. First of all, thank you, Eric. I appreciate it. The proposed recommendation for a 2% increase seems reasonable to me. My question is, do we need to, and perhaps this is something where Dean Batchelor, you can offer comment as well, do we need to recommend today in today's meeting, or can we defer this for 1 month to try to gain another month's experience with respect to where we're sitting today in light of the COVID pandemic? That's my first question. And then the second question is related to the transfer of money into the reserves. It seems reasonable and sensible that we program a significant portion of our team into design efforts now, assuming that there will be a possibility to leverage the position of where contractors are across the nation, quite frankly, because quite frankly, there are municipalities, including Palo Alto, that are just shut down from a contracting perspective right now. So it is reasonable to assume that your costs for construction are also going to be under some significant cost pressures going forward into Q3 of this year. And I'm wondering if we're looking at that from a procurement strategy perspective relative to some of the capital plans, strategic project plans that we are looking for the city of Palo Alto. So 2 questions.
So those are some great questions, Commissioner Smith. So let me address the first one. The first one is that, yes, we're looking for a recommendation because we're coming to you a little bit late on this recommendations around our budget portions of it. We are going to finance on April 21st. And so we were hoping to get a recommendation from the commission today on looking at either option, a 2% increase on the electric or the 0 recommendation. Again, it's due to the timing of what we have to make obligations to the finance group, as well as then going to the full council at that period of time with your recommendations as a whole, as a commission. So it is kind of timely. It will probably be late if we talk about this in May. Yes, unfortunately, we're looking for a recommendation today. I think answering to your second question, I think is, as you can see in the last bullet on this page, portion is up to approximately $7 million from the distribution operation reserves to the CIP reserves. We're looking again, as I mentioned earlier, is that when I was talking a little bit about the engineering groups, they're looking to look for advancing and speeding up their CIP projects so that we can be ready for looking at those economical pieces from the contractors themselves. And then at that point, we'll be kind of shovel ready to, we can go ahead and put out RFPs out and take advantage of hopefully the lower cost from the contractors.
Thank you.
I hope that answered your question.
It did. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? AC?
Yeah, I just, Eric, can you just confirm that the projections that you're making include or factor in the hourly accounting and the change in how we treat the RECs that we've discussed?
believe so. Yes, they do.
Okay, thank you.
Greg?
Yeah, just briefly, if we were to go to a 0% this year and then do the higher increases later, are we collecting less money overall? Are we collecting roughly the same amount of money, or were we, was there something in a previous slide I thought I saw that said we might defer some capital improvements then? I just wanted to get a sense, because I think what you're asking us to do is to choose between those two options.
I would say we're recommending the 2% rate increase. If we do a 0 at this point in time, we obviously will be deferring collecting revenue and having to make it up in the back end. We get the reserves eventually back to where we had planned. It just takes a little bit longer. You know, the sooner that you can do any rate increase, the easier that it is, you know, for longer term. But
so my question was, would we collect roughly the same amount of money or not?
Over the long run, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I mean,
so we would have potentially.
And I think we should do the 2% increase now. I mean, I think the only reason you'd argue against it, right, is that you think we might have a much deeper recession and a quick bounce back. Because I mean, if you have a L-shaped recession or a big U, I'm not sure what it does to have a 2% now and a 4% next year. I mean, I just not sure I see what the advantage is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I guess the increasing rates a little bit by any incremental increase that you do sooner does mean that even if we have a longer shape recession of any sort, that we don't have to do quite as much in the future. It's a hope and a guess. But like I said, the 2% rate increase is really it's a small inflationary increase. It was when we posed it. So,
yeah. Yeah, no, I think I'm supportive of the 2%.
Yeah.
If we have another low water year next year, that would be another reason to be prudent this year with the rate increase to plan for that. Is that a fair statement, Eric?
It's fair, although we do have money in our hydro stabilization reserve currently that we would be able to utilize should we have another dry hydro year. We also do have an option to implement the, we do have a hydro rate stabilization adder, which if dry conditions look like they will be continuing, we could activate that as well. We would bring a report to council recommending the activation of that, but those have their own matrix for both the level of increase what the level of adder we would put on. It's dependent on both the projected condition of dry hydro reservoir conditions, as well as the level of reserves we have currently. So we do have options there.
All right, thank you. Commissioners, is there more discussion or questions before we proceed to vote on this?
Chair Danaher, if when the commissioners are done with questions, I'd like to make a few remarks and ask questions, but I want to be sure everyone's had a chance to speak.
I don't see any hands go up, so Allison, please proceed.
Thank you, Chair Danaher. I just want to start by addressing Commissioner Smith's question about the timing and could we have more time? And I want to reassure you that this is the first step in a process. Director Batchelor is correct that we need to keep moving forward because our budget has to be ready to be certified in June, and this is of course a big part of it. And I'm grateful. You know, many of our commissions are not meeting because their business is not considered essential, but I'm grateful to this commission because you're closest to the detailed understanding of the trade-offs we're going to have to make. So appreciate you being the first step in the process. And I know it might feel uncomfortable. We have less information about the future than we're used to. Then just a few questions. So Mr. Keniston, well, first of all, Assistant Director Abendschein, thank you so much for the information about the decrease in load being primarily in electric as opposed to water and gas. That I'm not sure that was intuitive for me. So happy to know about that, which means that this is probably one of the more important decisions then we'll be making. Is there any reason to believe that if this shift is, you know, with more residential use, I guess I'll say, and less commercial use, that we think the rates will be different? You know, we talk a lot about the fixed costs being spread across the people who are actually using the utility. And I just wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit more about, if we have fewer business customers, will the people who live here essentially be paying more for the fixed costs? Can you just help us understand that a bit?
So this is Eric speaking. When we do a cost of service analysis to spread the costs amongst the various rate categories, it's always done with a little sort of in retrospect. If the change that we see is a short-term effect, I think we'd be loath to radically shift costs around between customer classes based upon that. If it looks like it becomes more of a structural change going forward, then yeah, you would have to redivide the pie based upon whoever is now using the majority loads of the system. I would say that our business customers still, even with a cutback like we've seen, are still would be one of our the major using class. But yes, in short, if the less that commercial customers use, that does shift more burden upon either residential or other users within the commercial class who might not have shut down or might not have been affected so much by this.
Okay, so not a decision to make now, but potentially an adjustment, say a year from now, if things seem more, if there are structural changes as opposed to temporal changes.
Correct, yeah.
Okay, thanks for that. And then the other question is, to the extent that our electric load is lower, is that at all an experience that utilities are having across the state? And does that affect the demand there might be for our excess energy, which we have been so effectively selling?
I can speak to the first part. Anecdotally, I've heard that in Northern California, loads have been down by also about 8 to 10%. I saw an email from, I'm part of a California rates group. Various utilities throughout the region have seen impacts of anywhere between 3 to 8 to 10%. It really depends on the nature and customer mix that they have, business versus residential. But I will say that we have seen, at least in Northern California, for loads coming in, it seems like this is what we're experiencing is fairly average. I'm not so certain on the second point. I don't know if Jonathan could have any input on that, or.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, we are seeing some decreases in prices, market prices. So we will see a little bit less revenue from our supply sales. We are, though, to the extent, and maybe this is a little bit longer term, to the extent we're actually able to sell surplus renewable energy, there's still a pretty significant demand for that because of the requirements, the mandates that people have to fulfill. So it's a mix of outcomes.
Okay, thanks. That's very helpful. And then, this liaison role, it's, I'll just go ahead and say one thing, that as we, the council and the city, move forward over the next couple months, making a variety of financial decisions, I've been reflecting on what would change my mind about whether or not we need to make dramatic changes in prices on a variety of things. So I'll just say for myself moving forward, as I make these decisions, if many or most people or businesses would have significant trouble with a minor rate increase, you know, whether it's for utilities or for another price of something, then I think keeping rates flat is worth considering. But if the issue is for a minority of customers, then I think minimal rate increases, changes to prices, whether it's this or something else, I think will be appropriate for us to continue to be able to provide the essential service we need and look forward to funding capital improvement projects, along with having payment plans, repayment plans, which seems like a good option. So I know that Dean Batchelor went over it quite quickly at the beginning, but the payment plan options we have for people who live here and for businesses who operate here are really meaningful, and I don't want that to be lost in the discussion as people talk about it. So let me see if I had anything else on electric. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for those thoughtful questions and comments. As you know, I've been pondering whether it be insensitive to be seen to be raising rates during the middle of this dramatic time. And where I come out in my own thoughts is that it's a very modest rate increase, particularly in the dollars per month. The businesses that are most affected during the shutdown are the ones that are not going to be using much mode in any event, and that the council has the opportunity not to accept our recommendation if they view the politics or public nature of this to be an inappropriate time. So
may I just add one more, just following along on that, Chair Danaher?
Please.
It's this particular decision feels like you may be making it in isolation, but you know, I just want to assure everyone here and anyone watching that we will be making this decision with the best information we have available in June as a package, right? And if something else happens or we have more information about how long this will take or other changes, council will have an opportunity to look at everything not in isolation, but in a connected manner. So again, this is the first step in the process.
Oh, thank you again for that. Very helpful. Commissioners, any further comments or questions? Please, Lauren.
I don't know if this is the right time to ask, but going back to my comment on the minutes and cap and trade revenue, I can't find it. I think it was in one of the links in the packet to a comment that there is uncertainty as to what cap and trade revenue will be coming down in the future from the state and whether that will have any impact on our reserves or on our electrification projects. We can talk about that after this vote if that's more appropriate. And then also to maybe follow along on council on Allison's comments, and that I think a 2% rate increase, if that's in line with inflation, makes sense to me, but I would like to see the when that goes out to just be clear to let people know there are these different payment plan options, and maybe emphasize that if anybody needs any kind of help, maybe those who are less familiar with it, because in other times it wasn't impactful, to make sure they're aware of it.
Thank you. That's a good suggestion. Other comments? All right, shall we have the staff's recommendation in front of us. Is there a motion to approve the staff's recommendation?
Motion to approve staff's recommendation.
Thank you. And a second?
I'll second.
All right, thank you. So we'll do this one at a time, alphabetical order. Commissioner Forcell.
I vote in favor of the motion.
Commissioner Jackson.
I vote in favor.
Commissioner Johnston.
I vote in favor.
Commissioner Scharf.
Yes.
Commissioner Siegel.
In favor.
Commissioner Smith.
Also in favor.
And Danaher votes in favor also. Thank you. We'll move on to the next item. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you. So moving in, I'll leave my video on temporarily. We'll see if we have the same issues. And if we do, let me know. But here we're also bringing to you today the gas utility financial plan and proposed rate changes for FY 2021. Next slide. So in this particular case, we are bringing you a slightly lower, we've changed direction. We originally were talking about doing a 5% rate increase earlier in the year. And now in light of everything we've seen, if we can try and drop that down a little bit and do again something a little lower, slower. So we're bringing a 3% rate increase. We also, again, we have a 0% rate increase scenario alternative. The gas fund is one where we don't have quite as much in the way of reserve surpluses like we do in, or as high of reserves as we do in the electric side. So here we're a little bit more cautious in recommending that we do still have a rate increase of some sort moving forward. So because we do see that there are going to be increasing costs moving forward with both CIP, distribution costs, et cetera. So next slide. Here, about 60% of our costs in the gas supply or the gas side are related to distribution, and about 40% related to supply. You can see the figures on the right are all, they have asterisks next to them. Those costs are based upon how much gas we bring in. So if we will save whatever we don't sell on those asterisk sides, but the capital investment and distribution components are relatively fixed unless we physically cut back on projects or on work to be done. Next slide. So here, gas supply is by far the most volatile element that we have in our portfolio. It changes month to month. In the last several months, it's actually been quite low. So that's been, good for customers, good for everyone, and that we've had low costs to pass through. Our gas transmission rates to PG&E mainly go to fund capital improvement projects on their side. There's a rate schedule. Whenever they change it, about every 2 to 3 months, we pass those costs through as well. We have cap and trade costs for any related allowances we need to buy to offset gas that we burn inside Palo Alto. The market prices on those go up by about 3 to 4% every year for what we have the cost on having to purchase those. But in the last several auctions, they've been relatively stable. We're also pursuing the carbon neutral gas plan. Next slide. Distribution cost drivers, same that you will see, many of them the same as what you see in the electric side, and that you will see across all the other utilities. Underground construction costs have been going up. One of the things that we've been working on here is also cross-bore investigations. We have a continuing contract to work on cross-bore projects. Those have probably been suspended at this point in time, but we will continue to investigate those when we can. So that is an additional cost that we have built into the gas distribution cost profile. So not much more to talk about on this slide. Next. On the gas, we're a little closer when it comes to PG&E. Our gas costs tend to be a little bit higher in the summertime and lower on the winter time, but in average, we're about 8% lower than PG&E for our residential bills. The reason this is we have a fixed charge on our gas, a monthly customer charge on our gas customers, whereas PG&E does not. So that ends up in low usage months. We would tend to have higher bills, but it nets out in the winter time. Next slide. So here is the proposed gas revenue profile that we're looking at, about a 3% rate increase in FY 2021, and that would necessitate about 6% rate increases going forward for the next several years. to keep up with proposed mainly capital improvement. We're resuming a plan of capital improvement projects, main replacement projects. We are investigating on the side to see if maybe, you know, in this economic environment, potentially bond financing some of this and maybe, you know, spread some of those costs out over time and might help that rate profile moving forward. We're in discussions right now with that to see how much that would cost. But right now, this is the preliminary profile that we're looking at, because as I said, a 3% with 6% increases going forward. Next slide. It's roughly split about 50-50 between, the cost increases would go roughly about half and half between CIP and operations and maintenance. Next. And with this, our operating reserves would stay within the guidelines. We would dip a little bit in FY23 with this proposal. But again, if we can look at maybe smoothing costs through bonds, we might be able to change this profile a little bit and maybe even lower some of the out-year rate increases. Again, all of these, on the gas side, we have not seen any usage shift related to the COVID situation. You can, you know, we're coming out of the winter heating season. People have been home, probably maybe even driving it up a bit. It's been kind of cool. I know the heater's been on at home here, but we've not seen much in the way of a change in the way of our gas inputs coming into the city. So on the whole, we're going to have our reserve should remain healthy. Next slide. So one of the things to note about this 3% change is that you can see we're well below, we're currently well below on residential bills, well below in the winter, higher on the lower end in summer, but the more the gas that you use, it tends to be less. When you look at the bottom of the proposed rates, one of the things that we're doing is we're reducing that monthly customer charge to all customers. And so the net effect will be that smaller users will see, could see actually a decrease in certain cases, and more of the cost will shift to larger gas users. And this will also carry forward to the commercial side, which you see on the next slide. We're less competitive with PG&E on the gas commercial side. Again, it's a factor of how our customer mix is overall, mainly, but the gas rate increase for commercial will roughly be 3 to 4% overall on that side with this proposal. Slide number 12 gets more into the wonky, the individual rate components, but you can see that the monthly customer charges are decreasing for pretty much actually all customers. And then going up, the offsetting amounts go into the gas, the distribution charges. So it's a 7% distribution volumetric cost increase, a decrease on the monthly customer charge. The net impact to customers being as the total load is about a 3%, 3 to 4% increase, about a 3% increase overall for customers, if that makes sense. I know it's confusing. I'm sorry. Any questions before I move forth? Next slide. And here is we're calling it alternative one. This was good. This was the original proposal based upon what we had in the preliminary plan, about a 5% rate increase. It does mean smaller rate increases moving forward, about 4% increases in outer years. Next slide. These proposals keep operating reserves within guideline ranges in all cases. So it would help in the long term. It would keep us afloat, but it would be more of an impact to customers if we did a 5 at this point in time, as can be seen on the next slide. So smaller customers would not see as much of a savings on the residential side. There would be more of an impact for larger gas users. There would still be a reduction in the monthly customer charge for some customers, but not all. On slide 16, it shows the commercial impacts. So here you can see to be a net, again, about a 4 to 5% increase for commercial customers. And slide 17, we can probably skip past it really fast. It shows the individual rate component changes there. But G2 would, in this case, the small commercial customers would still see a slight, and it would see an increase to their customer charge if we did a 5%. So this one here, we did run through the COSA model to create these individual charges. We have that pre-done. And this is actually the scenario that is currently entered into the gas financial plan. If we choose, and if you agree to go with the alternative plan and we move forward, I have an updated financial plan that has the 3% scenario built into it, and we will swap everything out. And that will be the final proposal that gets taken to council, should everyone agree. Next slide. And this is alternative number 2. With a 0% rate increase in FY 2021, you can, I'm going to pause for a second and ask if everyone could hear me there.
You were cutting in and out.
Okay. Is there anything you would like me to repeat?
Eric, can you just start from this beginning of the slide, please?
Sure, definitely. So here on alternative number 2, this is a proposal showing a 0% rate increase in FY 2021. What makes, as you can see, the capital in this year, we had planned on doing a large main replacement project. So revenues will be well below what costs are. We'd planned that this would cut into reserves a bit already. And in order to dig out and keep reserves in the operations reserves healthy and whole, we would need much larger rate increases moving forward under this scenario. Again, if we cash financed everything, there is a potential that some of these increases could be brought down somewhat if we did bond financing, but this gives a general perspective on how much we lose should we opt not to rating FY 2022 and large increases in 23.
Eric, you cut out after you said bond financing. So if you could repeat that, what followed, be good.
Okay. So there is a potential that if we could bond finance some of these costs going forward, that we might be able to reduce how much, change the cost profile a little bit, and maybe have a little bit less of a rate increase moving forward. But it's representative of how much revenue we would need to have or the kind of rate increases we would need to have with this cost profile to keep us afloat. On slide 19, you can see what happens to the operations reserve. Next slide. Under this scenario, the operations reserve gets right near to minimum, stays there for several years. So it places us in a more precarious position on the gas side to do a 0% rate increase. I think that's the takeaway from this alternative presentation here. And next, if any questions, next slide. So with that, that ends my presentation on gas. So this morning, we're bringing to you an updated recommendation for a 3% overall increase to rates. And we will, an amended gas utility financial plan. Again, depending on the final proposal, we will amend that financial plan to represent whatever the final recommendation is, either 3% or 5%. Amend the gas utility reserve management practices, again, we're making changes to how we discuss the CIP reserve going forward. And we also have in here, we're planning on pulling out any remaining funds we have in the rate stabilization reserve, currently about 2.5 million, moving that to operations to help keep things afloat. We also had up to a $4.5 million move from the operations reserve to CIP, but we may or may not be able to make that depending on how financial we can. That, again, that's why we write up to in these, depending on the final state of the operations reserve at the end of the year. We have a bit of wiggle room there so that we keep the operations reserve whole. And that ends my presentation.
Gary, thank you very much. Commissioners, questions on the presentation?
Thank you, Eric. Could you quickly go to your recommended gas cost and revenue projection chart?
Yes.
Slide maybe 6.
6.
Nope.
Nope. 2 down. 7. This one?
Yep. So in fiscal year 2021, it's 3%, then followed by 3 6s and a 1 for a total of 22% across the board. Can we now go to alternative number 1? If we advance to alternative number 1. Five, 4, 4, 2, 12, 19% cumulative. There's a difference in the total cumulative add. Is that intended?
Yeah, it will be slightly different because our ending operations reserve we don't have that. It's not exactly the same at the end of the 5 years. It's still within the guideline ranges, but it might end up at a slightly different place. So
if we look at the operating reserves for this scenario, alternative 1, I think it's the next slide. So in this, my takeaway from this is that I don't know what the proper way of stating it, but we bring forward a more stable target reserve level.
Yes.
Earlier in the 5-year period, is that the
yes.
target for alternative 1? Whereas the base case or the recommended case is we're saying we're in a state of crisis. I mean, just theoretically, we're in a pandemic, and we are going to dip into the reserves, recognizing the fact that we're simply in a pandemic. Is that the general thought process?
The proposed case would allow us to ease customers into a rate increase a little nicer in terms of moving forward. Yes. Yeah, we would be earning less in the upfront, which means it's a little harder going forward, but I don't know if that answers your question.
I think it does. I think at the end of the day, it's, for me, between recommended and alternative 1, it's how comfortable I am with respect to reserve levels in fiscal year 2021 and as it carries forward into 2022, and how far we dip into that. For me, alternative number 2 is risky. I think a 10% increase is going to be hard to swallow for anybody. So that rules out alternative number 2. But it's very difficult. I'm sure you can appreciate what I'm trying to do is understand why a 5% proposed 5% increase is worse than a proposed 3% increase if we're planning for maintaining a lower level going forward.
Agreed. So yeah, Gran, let's see if we. Yeah, it'd be nice if I had a comparison chart that could overlap the 3%, the reserve ending with the 3 and the 5, but we'd have to swap back and forth between charts. I also say that there's a slightly different, transfers into and out of CIP in this particular case, but yeah, it's a difficult proposition to say whether or not. Obviously, a 5% rate increase now eases future concerns going forward. 3% does open up a little bit more uncertainty, but it's still, 6% rate increases going forward is not terrible in light of where we've been at in the past. So, and again, we have not seen much in the way of any change to our gas usage profiles in the last month.
Well, let me ask you this. Have we seen any change in the last month in terms of capital investment from our supply side?
I do not have an answer for that one.
I mean, if we anticipate that our supply side is going to cut back on their level of capital investment, then we can assume that we're not going to be paying for that. Is that reasonable? Alternatively, we could equally argue exactly what they're doing at Caltrans is taking advantage of the fact that there's nobody on the road. So they're redoing an entire interchange between 101 and 280, which is brilliant, by the way, because there is nobody on the roads. But if we are going to spend for capital investment now during a period of downturn, and given the fact that PG&E has only a few vendors in the state of California who can actually do their work, do we anticipate that they are going to cut back on their capital investment? Because as you say, that's roughly 60% of our costs is basically fixed. Is that?
Well, I would say on the supply side, though, again, if our suppliers or if outside they decrease, that would be reflected in their rates, and those rates are passed through. So that wouldn't be reflective within our operating reserve. If they lower it, it would be passed on to customers. If they raise it, that also will be passed on to everyone. So externally, it doesn't have much of an operations reserve effect for us. I don't know if that helps, but.
And I think I actually just switched the two. I think the 60% is actually our gas distribution, not our supply. So I apologize. I'm just looking at this again. Okay, I think I understand what we're trying to do. Thank you.
AC, please.
Yeah, Eric, on your graphs, I take it that the capital investment cost portion, that's based on kind of current labor rates?
Yes, that's our current, that was the current budget amount that I got internally, yes.
So if we do see a decrease in labor cost, does that just mean we're going to accelerate capital improvement projects to take advantage of the lower cost, or would we see the lower cost in kind of lower annual costs?
If we had a lower CIP cost, it would be an automatic savings for everything. Pardon me. So,
so if we saw a lower CIP cost in your projections, that might mean we wouldn't have to increase the rates in subsequent years quite as much.
Correct. Yes. If we end up seeing a savings on CIP expenditures because of all this, then yes, of course, that will change the cost profile moving forward, at least in the short term. I would say though, during the last recession, we saw, we would see a savings on the initial projects that we bid, but as things come back, I'm sure the market will increase. So,
Mr. Johnson,
Okay.
this is Dean. So I think that going along with Eric's statement, I think the thing is that we would have to look at it at the period of time of what makes the most sense. Depending on what we do with our rate increases compared to economy of scales, if we would continue spending the same amount and getting more out mileage wise on our capital improvement program, it may make sense then at that period to continue on the path that we have today. But I think the thing is that, we have to be cognizant again about what that reserve looks like. So I think that we would take a look at it on at the time on what those economy of scales are from the contractor's pricing, because we might be able to squeeze more mileage out of the CIPs at the same rate that what we're spending today. And I don't know, at that point, we'd have to take a hard look at where our reserves are at that point. So as Eric said, I think that we're just going to have to wait, and unfortunately, I think until after the first of the year to see where these contractor pricings might go to. So I think our goal would be is that, in the gas side, we don't see as many leaks as we have in the past. The system is actually in really good shape, and this is one where we may look at economy of scales and taking a look at what makes the most sense from a financial perspective.
All right, thank you. That's helpful.
Other questions? No, Lisa, please.
Yeah, thank you. I just had a couple of clarifying questions. The original proposal, which I think is referred to in the at-place memo as the current financial plan as opposed to the alternate plan, or that as of today in the presentation is referred to as alternate number 1. Are those all the same thing?
yes, alternate number 1 was the original preliminary 5% plan.
And in the memo, it's called the current financial plan. So that's a 5%. But that, my understanding was that was an approximately 8% distribution charge. And so when we toss around the number 5%, that is the average bill change.
Correct.
Assuming supply costs increased only about 2% or thereabouts.
Yeah, so that assumes sort of a static supply cost with,
right.
Yeah, because again, of the 60-40 split between, yeah.
So the, given the global pandemic and the effects on the economy, do we have any new projections about supply costs, commodity charges, the price of natural gas in the next few months or in fiscal year 21?
I must admit, I have not seen any new projections coming through. I believe this last month, the gas, in April anyway, the gas prices did not shift dramatically. And I have not seen anything internally noting that gas prices are moving severely in any given direction, up or down. I don't know, Jonathan, have you seen anything?
Assistant Director Jonathan Aubenschein. The forecasts, so gas prices have moved a little bit lower, and forecasts are for lower gas prices over the next few years until they start cutting back on production. And I think some of those trends were coming even before the pandemic, but they're exacerbated by that, by the pandemic.
So I guess in terms of, because I think part of what we're trying to wrap our heads around is the impact on customers at, during a recession, but just as far as the projections go, seems likely that that the supply pass-through might go down. I guess I just want to point out that talking about it as a 3% versus 5% is not really the way to think about the impact on customers, especially given, where is it, which slides, pages 10 and 11, I think it is, and 12. The bill impacts ultimately are so different depending on the customer class and the usage rate. And I guess another one of my questions was, so a 3%, what we're calling a 3% increase is actually an average of, I'm assuming 6% or thereabouts on the distribution charges?
It's about a 5% distribution rate increase overall.
Gotcha.
Yeah. It adds about 2% on it. So the 5% overall is a 7% distribution rate increase. The 3% overall is a 5% distribution rate increase, roughly.
Right. Okay. But there are still customers who, in either scenario, their bills will go down. Low usage.
Small users, yes. For the residential class will go down. Correct.
Whether we do the staff proposal or whether we do alt number 1, there are customers whose bills will go down.
The 3% proposal, I will say also, there are quite a few small commercial users who do not use gas for large portions of the year. So the 3% proposal is nice in that it will help them as well on lowering their monthly bills. So that is a bonus a positive point on that alternative.
I see, their distribution charge will go down, and if they have little to no usage, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we have several small commercial users who are really, so the only time that they really turn on their gas is during the winter heating season, and otherwise they're mainly just paying the monthly customer charge. So doing this will help our all business.
And this rate change would go into effect July 1, if I understand.
Correct.
So in the middle of summer.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, my own feeling is that honestly, number 1 might be acceptable as well to maintain the financial health of the gas utility. The other thing, I guess, it doesn't quite feel like in the moment to point this out, but the original packet memo did refer to the fact that the load projections are not taking our SCAP goals of significantly reduced gas usage by 2030 into account. And that's another reason why I think sort of maintaining healthy reserve levels would be prudent, just because we might be, as a city, we might be choosing to take more dramatic action than we have in the past to reduce load. And that will have a significant financial impact on the gas utility as well. Just wanted to point that out as well. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Other commissioners? So there's been some discussion of whether the 5% would be better than the 3%. Does anybody else have a view on that? Back to the point we discussed on the prior agenda item, I am sensitive to rate increases in a time of hardship for a lot of companies. So I lean more towards the staff's revised recommendation of the 3%, but curious if others have strong feelings one way or the other. Don, please.
So I'm okay with the 3, I guess, given the current circumstances. I think getting back to, what Commissioner Forcell was just mentioning, I think that in general, the reason, just as a very high level concept, one reason we use a lot of natural gas is that it's inexpensive, and it has these environmental impacts, which we're all aware of. And so keeping natural gas cheap in general, and from a environmental perspective, is not necessarily a good thing. Understand? So in general, I'd be more interested in raising the rates higher. But given the current situation where economic consequences are of more immediate concern to all of us, and particularly local businesses, then I'm okay. I'm more comfortable with 3 than I would normally otherwise be.
I certainly don't have strong feelings. Commissioner Scharf.
Yeah, I didn't have particularly strong feelings, but I do think, given the climate, I think we should go with the 3%. And I think in some ways, it's a more conservative way in terms of dealing with the public and people's concerns, and economic hardships that they're suffering. And we may also see a large commodity drop, and we can then look at that when we look at rates for the next year. So I think a 3% on balance is sort of where I come out.
All right, Warren Siegel.
I guess I would just reiterate the comments of Commissioners Jackson and Scharf, really, and Forcell as well, that while I might be more inclined to want the higher rate increase for the reasons already mentioned, in light of the circumstances, I'm comfortable with the 3% proposal.
All right, Mr. Johnston.
Yes, I agree with the comments that have been made, and I'm more comfortable with the 3% than a 5% increase at this point.
All right. So, Councilmember Cormack, any further comments or questions?
One thing I'd like to add is I just want to be sure that Mr. Keniston's remarks about the decreasing monthly customer charge that he was discussing are prominent in the messaging for this. I think that's a sign that the Utilities Department is already taking into consideration the best way to be responsive. And so I just encourage that to be part of the communication process.
Okay. Excellent point. Is there any further discussion? Now let's go on to the staff's recommendation. Put that up on the screen, please. Oops. Is there a motion to approve the staff's recommendation?
I'll move to approve the staff recommendation.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I second.
All right. Let's ask for a vote then. Commissioner Forcell.
I'll vote in favor.
Commissioner Jackson.
In favor.
Johnston.
In favor.
Scharf. Greg, you're on mute there.
Yeah, in favor.
Thank you. Commissioner Siegel.
In favor.
And Commissioner Smith.
In favor.
And Danaher in favor. All right, thank you. We're behind the hoped for time, so perhaps we can go more quickly through this wastewater projection item.
All right, real quickly then, I'd like to introduce Lisa Belair, that is going to be talking about our wastewater collection financial projections, and then also asking for a recommendation on this item. So Lisa, go ahead.
Morning, commissioners, council member, everybody. I'd like to tell you a little bit about some general financial projections for the wastewater collection utility. So this is a little different. There's not a full financial plan associated with this. This will hopefully allow the full time and attention that the cost of service look needs, as well as ensuring that there's that our processes are in place for robust customer participation. So if we could go to the next slide. What we're here today asking you for is to support the idea of not increasing rates this July, and giving you a picture of what that will look like in the subsequent 4 years. And it would be about 5% per year rate increases. So we can go to the next slide. So as you know, the wastewater utility has both treatment costs, and that makes up about 60% of the costs, as well as the collection costs, making up about 40% of the costs. And you can see here the breakup in green on the left of the collections costs and in blue on the right of the treatment costs. Let's go to the next slide. The regional water quality control plant has 5 partners together with Palo Alto, and the City of Palo Alto Utilities Department manages the collection system, and Public Works manages the regional water quality control plant. Let's go to the next slide. Just a quick look at some of the cost drivers. On the treatment side, many of the facilities at the plant have been in service for over 40 years, and the plant is following their long-range facilities plan to rehabilitate or replace those facilities. And the next slide, please. This is just looking at some of the same operations and capital cost drivers that Eric mentioned: salaries and benefits, underground construction cost increases. The wastewater utility is also on a 2-year spending cycle for large capital improvement projects. And I just wanted to note that fiscal year 2021 happens to be a low year. So there's no large main replacement project scheduled for fiscal year 2021. Next slide, please. Okay, then this slide and the next one just show you a little bit of information about where Palo Alto's bills are relative to neighbors. And for residential customers, the Palo Alto's average bills are 26% below this set of neighboring communities. You can see that only a couple of these share the same plant as Palo Alto, Mountain View, and Los Altos. Let's go to the next slide for the commercial views. So for commercial, Palo Alto's average bills are actually higher than this group of neighboring communities. And it's just a wide variety of average bills. Okay, let's go to the next slide. This is just a reiteration of the cost projections over the next several years and the impacts that may be seen from 0% rate increases in 2021. This is based on the best financial information that we had going into this, which we would plan to utilize the CIP reserve. And so that's why the collection capital cost is shown at a steady amount over the next several years, because the actual capital expenses are coming out of the CIP reserve. But again, 2021 is a low CIP year. We just need to be thinking about preparing for 2022. And then I think there may be one more slide. Oh, this is just showing you the condition of the operations reserve throughout this period, if this is the plan. And it does go down fairly close to the minimum guideline level, but then you can see in 2025, it heads back up again. So it's hopefully not too concerning there. And then we'll go to the last slide. We're just here recommending that the UIC recommend to the council to make no changes to wastewater rates as of July. We'll keep reevaluating and may come back with a recommendation to increase rates mid-year.
Lisa, may I add something?
Yes, please.
So I just wanted to mention to the commissioners here that you may be noting that this recommendation is a little bit different from what we've been recommending in the gas and electric utilities to have a nominal rate increase. What's different here with wastewater is that we have a cost of service study that's in progress. And I wanted to speak to this because this was something that I asked Lisa to delay for a few months at my request. About a month ago, when the shelter-in-place order started, we were working pretty intensively to finalize the cost of service study. There will be some, we're expecting, with any cost of service study, you have some potential shifts between customer classes. And we felt like it was important for the public to have a full opportunity to participate. We also didn't want to rush the cost of service study. And we were finding that we really needed some additional time to make sure that we had everything buttoned up, and our attorney's office and our own resource management staff were being pretty heavily impacted by the shelter-in-place order for a variety of reasons: school closures, competing analytical requests, both for the attorney's office and for our staff. So I think things have changed a little bit in the last month or so. I think we've gotten comfortable with using Zoom for public meeting participation. I think we've recognized that it may be reasonable to have some rate increases even during this time. And so, had time been available, I think we might be bringing a slightly different recommendation to you right now. But where things are, I think what we're looking to do is make no changes as of July, and possibly come back to you either at the beginning, either for a rate increase next fiscal year, or possibly to come back for a mid-year rate change recommendation. That's the other possibility we're looking at. So basically, it was my direction to Lisa to move off of this, move off of trying to finalize this cost service study and focus on some of the other acute needs that we had around COVID response.
All right. Well, thank you for that explanation, Jonathan. Lisa, thank you for the presentation. So notion is no action now on any increase. Wait until there's more analysis is staff's proposal. Is there any discussion or question from commissioners? Lauren Siegel, please.
Hi, thanks. I'm just wondering whether you have enough time to, in the cost of service analysis, to include any impacts in particular with the restaurant industry being shut down, and if you have any expectations of how that's going to impact revenue for the year and therefore possible rate increases.
I would say for now that that's something that we are starting to look at for the financial plan. In terms of whether we look at that for the cost of service, I would echo what Eric said earlier, that whether that is a long-term change or a short-term change, we don't know. And so I'll be seeking advice from our consultant on that question for cost of service. If anyone else would like to add anything.
Thank you, Lisa. Commissioner Forcell, please.
I just have an informational question about the facility, the Regional Water Quality Control Plant. If you could bring up slide 4 again. Just trying to interpret the slide. RWQCP needs rehabilitation a plan was completed in 2012, and then there's a list of projects. Are these projects that have been completed? Are these projects that still need to be completed? When the plan was completed, I assume that was a document, not that these projects were completed. If you can just speak to what's the state of our WQCP and how many of these projects are still in need of implementation.
The idea on this slide was to give you a sense of the projects that are coming up that are driving rate increases going forward.
Gotcha.
That's what, the plant provided as some of the major projects that are coming up. It's not comprehensive. It's just gives you an idea of
the nature and scope of what needs to be done.
Yes.
Gotcha. Thank you very much. And none of these have been started yet. This is where you're saying you're looking at 2022.
I cannot speak to whether any of these have been started or how much completion has been done. I'd have to look into that and try to get back to you about that question. I will look back into that, but these are cost drivers going forward.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's very helpful.
All right, Councilmember Cormack, any comment?
Yes, thank you, Chair Donaher. Two things. One is for wastewater, not quite sure why, but I'm less worried about the operations reserve. And the next time we see this, do we have a capital reserve for this as well, presumably?
Yes, there's a capital reserve.
That's the one I'd be interested in seeing next time we go through this. And I certainly appreciate Assistant Director Abenshine's approach and explanation. I'm in agreement with that. And then I think just as a point of information for everyone, there is work continuing that is considered essential construction work at the Regional Water Quality Control Plant. It's one of the few things we still have going on in the city, is my understanding. So just an explanation, reminder, people don't talk about this. It's always at the end of the presentations, but it's certainly an essential task. I just want to be sure everyone understands that work is still continuing.
All right, thank you. So there's no further discussion. Let's go to the recommendation slide. All right. We recommend no changes to the rates. Is there a motion in favor of this?
I'll move in favor of the staff recommendation.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right. So we'll ask for vote then in alphabetical order. Commissioner Forcell.
Yes, in favor.
Jackson.
I'm in favor.
Johnston.
In favor.
Scharf.
Yes, in favor.
Siegel.
In favor.
Smith.
In favor.
Danaher in favor. All right. Thank you, Lisa. And thank you, Jonathan. So the last agenda item is to talk about the rolling calendar. One of the points that Don brought up in email was about the minutes. We'd like to have discussion of the SCAP at some point. Dean, what would be an appropriate time for that?
Thank you, Chair Danaher. So I'm thinking that we can bring something back, probably back to the commission, probably in the July timeframe meeting. I think that we can have some pretty good conversation. There was a presentation done to the council on the SCAP this past Monday, but there were still some things that needed to be fleshed out on that. So I'd rather wait a little bit, be able to give you a full picture of what the SCAP looks like as we move forward in the coming years. So I would say that we could do something in July.
All right. Greg Scharf?
I'm good.
Okay, went off mute. Other requests for items in the near term to go on the agenda? AC, please.
I noticed in the utilities report, the quarterly report, that there was a short discussion about the program for emerging technologies, the applications that we get And I don't think we've heard much about that for a while. I would be interested to hear what's going on with that program. It looks like the number of applications are declining, and I'm wondering why that is, if there's something we should be doing to encourage more applications.
Dean, is that something we could have a short report on? That program just educational at one of these upcoming meetings?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'll need to talk to the team a little bit more about that one, and I can't set a date at this period of time. We'll set a date. I'll put it in and for the future portion of it, and then we definitely can have a conversation over that.
Okay, excellent.
Great, thanks.
I know eventually there's some interest from several commissioners to hear more about selling recs. We don't need to do that this next quarter, but perhaps later in the year would be a good time for that if we keep that in mind. I really appreciated the COVID update at the beginning, but I think we would all like an update at each meeting on how that's affecting projections for the utility. If that could be repeated, would be good.
Sure.
Lauren, please.
I'll go back to my cap and trade, because I saw in the gas backup, there was that one of the reasons for additional costs was cost associated with the cap and trade program. And then in the minutes where we talk about revenue being used from cap and trade. So maybe just an educational presentation at some point on how those monies go both directions and how we're impacted by cap and trade.
All right. That would be fine. Yes, Don Jackson, please.
I have a proposed topic for the future, not right away, and not as a specific action item to the utility staff at this time. But the proposal is that after we get some distance through this crisis that we're dealing with, to take a look at how the internet infrastructure in Palo Alto, whether it's our existing municipal utility as well as commercial internet providers to our residents, has performed, and how our needs have been met or not met as we dealt with this crisis as a function of that infrastructure, as a potential indication of whether or not we may need improvements in the distant future to deal with further crises. So it's just something to think about for the, in 6 to 9 months.
Well, it certainly relates to the fiber to the node proposals that have been underway. And Dean, yes, probably sometime in the next few months, we should have a report on progress with the fiber plans.
Yeah, we can talk a little bit more about that, but a little bit more about Commissioner Jackson's question. In the RFP that is out, in phase 3, we're actually looking at doing it's in that portion of it, it's being asked to look at how we're actually doing with the system itself. And then are there, any kind of choke points? Are there any areas that we need to improve? So that will be coming out in the RFP section. Like I said, it's phase 3 of that. It'll be a little bit of time, but we can look into this a little bit further and see if we can get some quick answers. And maybe I think that we definitely can meet the 6 to 9, but we're not going to be able to meet it in the RFP timeframe because that phase 3 goes out some time from now. But we can definitely get some information together.
All right. Well, an update on that would be useful.
Sure.
At any rate. Any other requests from commissioners? Allison Cormack, please.
No, it looked like Commissioner Forcell had her hand up. I'll go last.
All right. Please.
Yeah, I just wanted to raise as a future topic, not one that needs to be put on the agenda for the next meeting, but at some point in the summer. I think Commissioner Siegel and I would really like to return to the discussion of gas emissions, distribution and transmission system leaks, and how we account for that in our greenhouse gas accounting. We've met with staff once to talk about it, and we're working on a memo and would love to get that agendized at some point.
Okay, excellent. Excellent. All right. Council member, please.
Thank you, Chair Danaher. I just wanted to return to Commissioner Jackson's request about the SCAP and just a little bit more information on the timing of the plan for this year and slightly different perspective than Director Batchelor has. So staff had asked us to just sort of approve a plan on Monday evening, and I made an amendment asking that it come back as an interim report before the end of our break. So that would be before the end of June, because I felt that there was a big gap between the high level that we were seeing and then the detailed numbers that are going to be necessary for us to meet our plan. And again, with complete acknowledgement of the primacy of the emergency going on, I just want to let you know that council will be getting an interim report in June. So if the UAC doesn't review the SCAP until July, that will be after our interim report, but before the final. So just perhaps the chair and Director Batchelor can think about the best timing. I will say the level of detail, it's just like going through these utility rates, right? It requires a lot of time and experience and consistent approach. And I feel the UAC provides council and the community with that going through the rates. And I think with the SCAP, the UAC is frankly in the best position of our boards and commissions to continue to do the more detailed work that supports council being able to make an informed decision. So I'll leave that in the hands of the chair and the director.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Don Jackson, please.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Cormack, for that clarification, for that important context. So I guess I would raise the urgency of my interest in having this discussed sooner versus later. It's like if we met in early to mid-June, that would be a great time to do it. I think I'm generally prefer to provide input to the council before the council decides on it versus afterwards. It just doesn't seem like it's a good use of anyone's time for us to review things after the council's already approved them or moved forward. So I guess I would increase the urgency and priority of my request to review, looking at the SCAP stuff in June.
All right. Well, Dean, I know the staff has a huge amount on their plate, but if we could make that up in May or June, be prepared for a discussion on that would be good.
All right, Chair Danaher. So one of the proposals that staff is looking at, we wanted to make a proposal to all of you is not to have a June meeting because we don't have probably enough to cover for one full meeting. And so we were actually thinking if it was possible, if the commission would allow it to push the June or the May 6th meeting until May 20th. And that we could have a full agenda at that period of time. And then at that same time, going back to Commissioner Jackson's point, we could actually talk about the SCAP in that May 20th timeframe. And then also, it was brought up some meetings ago to talk about the water supply rehabilitation during the drought, and then talking about how the water system actually works. And so that was going to be one of the topics that we were going to bring back in that May 20th timeframe. And then also talking a little bit about AMI, where that's at, and then an update on the EV program. So, so we're asking for the commission to think about if it's possible to have not the June meeting, but actually have a later May meeting, and we'll combine the two.
Well, let me ask, if we had the SCAP and the water reliability, and then perhaps briefer reports on AMI and the EV program, but we also had the budget approval and then the Western-based resource contract update. That sounds like a lengthy agenda. Is that practical to do?
Well, I think that, the budget approval portions of it, I think the thing is that you pretty much have gone through most of all the budget portions now. I don't think that that's going to be a really lengthy conversation to have. You know, and I think that the water supply, and then also the presentation portion on that, talking about the system itself, you know, they could take a little bit of time in there. And then like I said, I was thinking at that point, we could have a longer discussion on the SCAP, unless we're going to have a couple of shorter meetings, if that's preferable.
Commissioners, any preferences?
Well,
I have a question.
I had one.
Well, Lisa, Warren Siegel first, please.
Thank you. I had one question, which is, we didn't have a lot of information yet about usage and the impact of sheltering at home. And would we have that information by May 6th? Because I think that while we have had a lot of conversations on rates, if that information is very different from what we've based our conversations on to date, we may need to reconsider. So that would be my first question, whether we'd have that information. And then it also does sound like a lot of some very important topics that I wouldn't want to rush through in one meeting.
Don Jackson, you had your hand up.
I had another question, and I cannot remember. When did we not have a meeting in August, or was it July of last summer? And I'm just wondering, how many meetings are we not going to have going forward versus the quantity of topics that need to be discussed?
I believe that, if my memory strikes right, I believe that we didn't have a meeting in August. So our thought processes would be is that we would still continue to have as many meetings, and we would pick up the August meeting with topics. It was just a thought that since staff is kind of inundated with this COVID-19, that we're kind of falling behind on a little bit of some of the information that we were that we had shown in the 12-month rolling calendar. So we were thinking that we were going to combine this one and then skip to June and then have it later in May. We can still push, if the commission prefers to push the meeting in May a little later, we might be able to have a little bit more information, as well as, we can use some of the lengthier conversations around the SCAP at that point.
I would say that it's not my decision, but I'm okay with moving the May meeting to later in May, given it's already late April, more or less, or middle of April. That's one point. Another thing is, I would say, in terms of being cognizant of staff's workload, I think it's more important for me to do a deep dive on SCAP than it is to do a deep dive on AMI in the May timeframe. So I'm willing to push the AMI discussion out a bit in favor of having the SCAP sooner, given the amount of time for the UAC meeting and staff's time before the meeting.
I personally have a slight preference for the shorter meetings and doing two of them, but we could certainly postpone the one for the first week in May. Any other preferences from folks? Yes, Lisa, please.
Yeah, it sounds like I'm not alone in feeling like not wanting to cancel the June meeting, but having a preference for more frequent but shorter meetings. And I'm definitely sensitive to staff having a lot to do, especially right now. And we often request informational and educational items, and I think it's fine to postpone several of those. But like Commissioner Jackson, I think talking about SCAP and items that are actionable or that council is going to be weighing in on soon are the ones that I would prioritize. And actually, methane emissions is pretty relevant for SCAP. So Dean and John, we can talk a little bit more with you offline about if that's appropriate for, say, a June meeting.
All right, but Dean, it sounds like there'd be a lot of interest in having a May meeting with SCAP being the agenda item and perhaps a couple other items if staff is prepared and it's not too burdensome. And it could be either the 13th or the 20th, I suppose. We haven't done a calendar check with people. And then we do want to be very conscious of burdens on staff, particularly in this time. So to leave you some flexibility in what might be prepared. Jonathan, please.
Since I think my staff will be responsible for doing a lot of the SCAP update, I would definitely advocate for a later meeting, either later in May or even the first week in June. Report deadlines for the first week of May are I think in the next couple of days, and I know we're not prepared to write up an SCAP update. We need at least a few weeks.
Okay. And yet we want to do it in time to be of utility to the council if we have anything to contribute.
Yes, and I think we can pass on that information with a late May, early June meeting.
Okay. So would commissioners then be all right with a May 20th meeting? We'd not be canceling the June meeting. We might reschedule it. That sounds like I see nods and thumbs. Okay. And a frown from Greg Scharf. All right. So Dean and Jonathan, maybe that seems to be people's preferences. And again, we can talk separately about making sure it's manageable for staff.
All right. Well, then we'll shoot for then the May 20th timeframe.
All right.
And then just one last thing, if I could, on April 22nd, from 4 to 5, we have a budget ad hoc meeting with 3 of the commissioners. Are we still on for that, commissioners?
I was planning on it.
Okay.
I'm certainly still available. Which budgets are we still?
We were talking about the utility budget overall.
The overall, okay.
Yes. Okay. Commissioner Jackson, you still okay? Sorry. Commissioner Jackson, are you okay with that?
I'm fine. I'm still available to meet, and not unless there's some reason why we don't need to meet or it's too burdensome to have.
No, I think the thing with just the question is that, you know, like I said, we want to go over the overall budget with you and make a presentation to that. And I just wanted to make sure that everybody was still okay for the 22nd.
All right. It sounds like that's the case.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
I don't think we have further business. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll move to adjourn.
Second?
I'll second it.
All right. And let's just do it with a show of hands this time. All in favor? All right. We're adjourned. Thank you, everybody. And Dean and Jonathan, thank you all for all the hard work and for your teams and best of luck.
Yeah.
Great.
Yep. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you all.
And Tabitha too for organizing us.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.